But I now would like to ask Ilya Ivaninsky, who is on the schedule. And Ilya, are you here? I see you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am.
He also is our PhD student in High School of Economics, PhD doctoral school. And he has huge experience in banking because he, for many years after graduating from master degree in our university in finance, he worked for Boston Consulting Group, and still is working for Boston Consulting Group. And as I know, for some years in the past, or maybe just latest years in his career, he was involved in banking. But nowadays, his paper is not about banking. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. But he is trying to investigate the new financial technologies and mainly blockchain. And he already made some preliminary empirical paper. And I would like him to discuss this paper with everybody in this really big room. Please go ahead, Leah.
Thank you very much. And Eugene, thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. And being a consultant for bankers for almost like 10 years by now, it's really interesting to hear about the systemic risks and in China, which, as you said, are very relevant to Russian market as well. So the topic of my paper is the impact of blockchain on corporate governance. And so it goes like this. So we know, and probably all of us know, that there is a systemic conflict, right, in almost any organization between shareholders and management, who typically seek diverse objectives, and there's sort of a lack of accountability of management who act as agents for the principals, for the shareholders, right? And because of that, there's a conflict, right? And there are different ways to sort of to tame the conflict, and among them are expensive things like board of directors, compensation incentive schemes, etc., etc., etc. And among sort of, but those are the, oh, sorry, like this. Yes. So those ways to control management by the by shareholders typically rely on third parties, right? And but sometimes shareholders have ways to exercise direct corporate governance over the management that they technically hire. Right, and there is a variety of ways discussed in literature, and most of you probably know. The easiest way, of course, for shareholders to govern their management is sort of voting with their feet, meaning that when a shareholder is dissatisfied with the management, they just leave the company, they sell the shares, etc. And on the most extreme cases of governance, shareholders can exercise their right to manage, to control the management by so-called shareholder activism, right? When they initiate a buyout, or the shareholders initiate some kind of a campaign and they provide an alternative slate of decisions for annual shareholder meeting, and then the whole thing goes public, and it's typically a very colorful context, right? But in between those two extremes, right, between selling the company altogether and acting as an activist, as Carol Icahn type of activity, there is shareholder proposals, right, at annual meetings, and this has been a very popular and widely discussed way of exercising governance over management by submitting shareholder proposals, say on the compensation, management compensation schemes, on board of directors structure, and on various other questions to the shareholder meeting. So management brings in the proposals, and shareholders bring proposals. And there are multiple proponents and opponents of this measure, and some people say that this is a great tool of exercising governance for the management, because for shareholders, sorry, because it's like direct democracy. On the other hand, some people argue that this may or may not be very effective, because some of those proposals are non-binding in nature, so management can disregard them and ignore. But anyway, if whatever side you take on the question, there is no doubt that this is a measure of sort of at least shareholder activity. So shareholders who submit more proposals are more active than those who do not, right? And to some extent, it is a measure of a conflict in the organization, because if you get a lot of proposals as a management board, it typically means that somehow your shareholders are not 100% happy with the actions that they propose. But this discussion has been in place for a while by now, right? Well, there are some new things that change the nature of principal-agent relationship in an organization and between shareholders and management in particular. And these things are, of course, digital technologies. And there are many digital technologies that affect the relationships of management and shareholders in an organization. Right, and here on the slide you see 4 of them, which are particularly interesting, I think, for investigation. Those are blockchain, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, and big data. And those technologies, the blockchain is sort of in a sweet spot for research, because it's sufficiently mature by now. So there are many companies who do explore blockchain as a means of increasing efficiency and also as a means of exercising governance, right? At the same time, it has a huge potential impact, right? And it's being discussed as sort of the most influential technology out there compared to artificial intelligence, what have you. And at the same time, it's not 100% clear how blockchain would impact the corporate governance, the quality of corporate governance in a company, right? Hence, it's very interesting to look at it and to see for ourselves, do companies who implement blockchain solutions, do they get more principal agent conflict or less principal agent conflict, right? And hence, what's going on there? So just to be on the same page, right? What do we mean by blockchain? Blockchain has 2 ways of applications. The first and the very basic one is a reliable distributed ledger. Right, and the ledger is sort of effectively a database that is stored on multiple computers at the same time. For example, if all of us participants of this conference, we want to share some knowledge, we create a blockchain, and whenever something is changed on one of our computers, it gets automatically changed on all the computers in the system, right? This is a very basic thing, and this is what powers transactions in blockchain, and this is what powers popular cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., etc. Right. On the other side of the spectrum, there is more radical sort of form of blockchain applications called smart contracts. And smart contracts is something that are obligations that are stored in computer code instead of paper contract that is enforced by legal authorities. So if some people in the room agree to have a smart contract between them, and one side of the agreement sort of fulfills his or her side of the agreement, the smart contract gets executed automatically. So those are 2 blockchain applications, and research literature covers generally 3 topics: the way blockchain impacts corporate governance in particular. Right. First of all, the topic is whether blockchain makes shareholders more or less active. Right, and there is debate that if a company engages in blockchain, in some kind of blockchain activity, shareholders become more attracted to the company. They start to pay more attention to the company. They start to participate in shareholder meeting more actively, etc. Hence, this decreases of course, the level of conflict, because the conflict is created by passive investor base, right? And since passive base is not as passive anymore, it decreases the conflict level. Second one, of course, is the voting itself. Right, of how blockchain impacts most popular sort of causes of conflict, meaning where shareholders and management disagree. So the structure of board of directors, the compensation schemes, etc., etc. And the third topic that is out there in discussion is actually what actions are necessary to maximize the value of blockchain implementation. But there is an overarching question in literature on how do shareholders actually respond to a corporate exploration of blockchain as a technology in general, right? And ever since, even though the blockchain has been out there in the market more or less since 2008, there has been still very limited empirical evidence on what's going on in a company if a company starts exploration of blockchain. And this is the gap we intend to fill with the research in question, right? And we explore blockchain influence on the corporate governance from 2 points of view. One is shareholder activity, right? Do shareholders become more or less active if a company engages in blockchain? And the logic is relatively simple, right? So if we see that there are more shareholder proposals at the shareholder meeting, right, or there's a higher likelihood of receiving shareholder proposals for the annual meeting, it means that the shareholders are more active, right? And this would mean that the principal agent conflict is sort of weaker in the organization. On the other side, there is a question of support of managerial decisions, right? Because being active is one thing, but actually being supportive of your management is a whole other thing, right? And here that we see two potential, this is the hypothesis, two potential questions, right? So if management gets a weaker support for management-sponsored proposals, this means that either shareholders are sort of less friendly towards management, right, and they disapprove more proposals than before, or it just means that shareholders are active. So to check for this, what we do is we see if management-sponsored proposals actually get sort of affected in terms of being implemented or not, sorry, being approved or not. So if shareholders are active, right, and it doesn't have any effect on the sort of the quality, the proportion of management-sponsored proposals approved, this means that there is a less principal agent conflict in the organization. All right. So this is our hypothesis. So the data that we use to conduct our analysis is a sample of US traded firms, and there are nearly 3,000 firms in the sample. All of them are traded either in New York Stock Exchange or Amex or NASDAQ. And of those nearly 3,000 firms, we find approximately 550 plus companies that do some kind of blockchain activity. And this is the hand-picked sample of firms. So we basically went line by line of nearly 3,000 companies and checked if they do or do not do something in blockchain space. And we here have two ways of defining blockchain participation of a company. One, which we call strong, is if a company actually does something in blockchain. For example, they participate in some kind of blockchain consortium, or they partner with some kind of a startup, or they develop a blockchain solution by themselves in one way or another. So this is a strong. And weaker form of blockchain participation is sort of if a company just talks about blockchain, right? If a CEO on a conference says that yes, the blockchain is a very interesting topic for our exploration, and then not necessarily does anything, or at least based on public sources of information. So what we find when we compare those adopters and non-adopters of blockchain technology, we find that in many ways they're similar, but there are 4 ways that they are sort of different. So one is we see that firms that do apply blockchain even in a weak form, they are significantly, almost like 6 times bigger on average in terms of market capitalization than blockchain non-adopters. So here market capitalization is in billions of dollars for adopters and for non-adopters. We also see that the valuation for the valuation multiple, so market book value for adopters, is also higher than for non-adopters. And we see for our research that the average number of shareholder-sponsored proposals is nearly 5 times bigger for adopters than non-adopters. And there is also a minor difference in leverage size. So this is the sample, right? So then what we do, we analyze what impact does blockchain participation, so measured as a dummy variable that the company does something or does not does something in blockchain space, on the likelihood of receiving a shareholder proposal, right? And this is the left column in the table. So what we find is that a company that does participate in blockchain activity in sort of in a weak form, right? It does not have any impact on likelihood of receiving a shareholder proposal. right? So if you just talk about blockchain and don't do anything there, the likelihood of receiving a shareholder proposal is the same as if you're a non-adopter. However, if a company does something actively in blockchain space, if they participate in a consortium or they buy a startup or what have you, it does have a significant positive impact on the likelihood of shareholder proposal. So companies that do blockchain, actively pursue the blockchain as a technology, they are more likely to receive a shareholder proposal, right? And to control for that, what we do not a logistic regression on the likelihood, but a linear regression on the number of shareholder proposals that companies receive. And we see that in both forms of blockchain activity, the companies that do participate in blockchain activity, they have more shareholder proposals than those that do not. Right, but as I said, so this only shows us that the shareholder proposal the companies that do pursue blockchain as a technology, they have a more active shareholder base, right? However, it does not tell us yet anything about if the management is more friendly or more hostile towards the management. So to do that, we run a separate regression and we run like 4 sets of regression for blockchain adopters and non-adopters on management sponsored proposals, right? And we see that we would check if what is the level of support for sort of managerial sponsored proposals for adopters and non-adopters. And here as well, we use blockchain strong and blockchain weak as our measures for blockchain participation of a firm. And we see that in all sort of across all 4 regressions, which are 2 types of blockchain activity and 2 types of shareholder, 2 types of proposals for the meeting, blockchain adopters have the weaker support of proposals at the shareholder meeting. So this indicates that there's a risk that if you do participate in blockchain activity as a firm, you run a risk of less support for you as management by your shareholders, right? So yes, your shareholders become more active, but it looks like you have a higher chance of sort of smaller support of your proposals. But to check if this sort of weaker support, we do not know yet if this weaker support for management-sponsored proposals is a sign of a conflict or just of a more active voters base, right? Because if you do not do, for example, if you have only like 10% of your shareholders participating versus 25% shareholders participating, this is a very big difference, right? And bigger voters base can be an explanation for a sort of average weaker support for your proposal as a manager. We run the final set of regressions where we check the share of proposals passed versus non-passed for blockchain adopters and non-adopters. And here we find that for management-sponsored proposals, the likelihood of proposal passing through the meeting is not affected significantly by blockchain. So what we find, whereas, however, on when we look at total set of proposals submitted for the annual meeting, which includes managerial sponsored proposals and shareholder sponsored proposals, the likelihood of passing of a proposal is negatively affected by blockchain, by participation in blockchain in either form, right? So concluding, and I think I'm running out of time, we find that yes, firms adopting blockchain as a technology have more active shareholders, and they have, at the same time, they have similar level of shareholder, sort of management-sponsored proposals approval at the shareholders, which I believe is a sign of a weaker principal-agent conflict in an organization that pursues blockchain activity overall. That's it. Thank you very much. We'll be happy to take questions, even though I believe we are severely late.
Okay. Do we have questions? Questions are just growing.
Okay, yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes.
We can talk in Russian as well if you want.
I don't know. I can try in English. Okay, thank you very much for presentation. And I'm just wondering, there are a lot of blockchain applications, not only to corporate governance, but to many other things. There are not so many ready solutions, but don't you think that many large companies that are actively doing something in this blockchain technology area, they don't intend to improve their corporate governance using this blockchain. They just adopt this technology for other purposes, and probably this the results might indicate that blockchain applications become a common thing, and the most advanced, most I would say large, advanced, and most technologically capable companies are trying to implement this blockchain technology, and that's why you have these results. You have the probably some impact on corporate governance because there are some trends in this corporate governance related to the most advanced, technologically advanced companies. Can you?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think you were making an excellent point, right? That when a company pursues blockchain activity as such, it's not necessarily focused on the corporate governance improvement, right? You are exactly right here, right? Moreover, if we wanted to run sort of a set of regressions on the companies that only do blockchain for corporate governance specifically, that would be very hard, right? Because of all those 500 companies that do pursue blockchain, handpicking those who do it specifically for corporate governance would be very tricky, right? However, what we are looking at and what we are interested in is if you do, say, pursue blockchain in general, right? In general as a firm, right? And you say, you include the blockchain as part of your strategic agenda, right? Because this is a strategic initiative to participate, for example, in an international blockchain consortium like R3 or like Hyperledger, etc. So it draws a lot of media attention. It draws normally. There are some even anecdotal evidences, right? When a company does something in blockchain space, the shares increase immediately like 20 to 30%. And there's a set of companies who do it on purpose, right? So what we're interested in is if you do pursue blockchain activity, what is the reaction of your shareholders, right? If I'm a manager and I want to pursue blockchain as a strategic direction for my firm, would my shareholders generally be happy about that or not happy about it, right? And will they approve my actions or disapprove my actions, right? And will they exercise their sort of approval or disapproval at the annual meetings? That's what we're looking at.
Okay.
And this is what we find, right? We find that yes, they do. They do come more often to the meeting. They submit more proposals, and they may agree or disagree. And but yet they continue sort of the similar level of approval of my decisions as a manager. So I get, as a result of implementing blockchain, I get more active shareholders, which do not get much more hostile toward me. So it's sort of a blockchain application in this sense. It makes the principal agent conflict a little bit weaker in our organization.
Okay.
Thank you very much. You're exactly right about the applications, corporate governance applications. But let me also share some also insights that we gained by looking at the. Thank you very much for pointing this out. By looking at the companies that do implement blockchain for corporate governance, right? And there are some very different sort of pilot implementations that are out there right now. Right, the easiest form of application of blockchain specifically for corporate governance is for shareholder voting, right? And there are many big pilots of NASDAQ in many markets where NASDAQ plays, when shareholders vote using blockchain software as opposed to classic ways of submitting your shareholder proposals, right? And the particularly famous example would be a Santander bank, which got the highest level of participation at voting that they ever got, of 65% shareholders participating in shareholder voting when it was done on blockchain. Right, and at the other side of the spectrum, there are extreme applications of blockchain for corporate governance through applying smart contracts at scale, right? And for some people try to create whole organizations without any involvement of management whatsoever, right? So-called decentralized autonomous organizations, and this is already a reality. And there has been a quite colorful attempt to do a DAO investment fund, which raised, I think, $150 million with an intent of being managed solely by smart contracts and with all the rights and decisions exercised by investors, which unfortunately failed because the smart contract that sort of was governing the operations of the fund was flawed. On the computer code level, right? And hackers froze nearly a third of the assets submitted there. But the people are trying. People are trying.
Вопрос следующий. Есть ли статистика по вашей выборке? Я дам пример перехода на русский язык раз. И второе, у нас время сжимает, так что компактный ответ.
Да, статистика по выборке. А что вы имеете в виду под статистикой? То есть статистика...
Страны, что вы сравниваете?
Да, это Америка. Это американские...
Что сравнили с Россией тогда?
Нет, с Россией мы не сравнивали. Просто в России...
Понял, спасибо.
У Евгения был вопрос. Да.
Можешь этот слайд с моделью показать?
С которой?
Не понял, да. Нет, да, здесь. То есть, смотри, у тебя дата cross-sectional, правильно? У тебя не панель.
Да. Пока не панель. Панели мы сделаем, да.
Ты не можешь говорить до и после, там, да?
Пока нет, пока нет.
До блокчейна, после блокчейна. У меня вопрос следующий. У тебя в выборке все компании. Блокчейн Weak и блокчейн Strong — это дами переменные, правильно?
Да, да.
То есть получается, что в модели, где у тебя блокчейн Weak, это единичка, а 0 у тебя no блокчейн.
Смотри, да.
И блокчейн Strong.
Да, когда я делаю блокчейн weak, у меня туда попадают и те, которые strong, и те, которые weak. То есть вот как бы широкая выборка. Да.
То есть здесь, я думаю, как бы предсказывая, например, если бы я был рефери статьи, которая пришла бы на публикацию, то есть, я бы предполагал, что тебе напишут, что у тебя есть селекция. То есть должна быть первого этапа регрессия, которая бы объясняла бы наличие блокчейна или ее отсутствие. Знаешь, как этот, извини, пожалуйста, сейчас русский, Heckman selection.
Да, Heckman selection, да.
Да, Heckman selection. То есть first stage would be blockchain, no blockchain, and second equation would only be for the companies which have blockchain. То есть у тебя как бы те же факторы объясняют наличие или отсутствие блокчейн-технологии и как бы и влияние блокчейн-технологии. То есть можно было сделать вначале просто, да, говорю, селекцию, а потом уже... Потому что тогда у тебя есть три группы. Нету блокчейна, слабая блокчейн, сильная блокчейн.
Или вводить другие переменные немножко.
Или тогда третью даме ввести, да, no блокчейн. Да, хотя бы no блокчейн. Да. Ну, как бы селекция, думаю, что лучше, да, все попробовать, чтобы показать, например, что селекция это, да. Потому что у тебя как бы, особенно когда у тебя объяснительное переменное количество proposals, то есть как бы гипотетически у тебя получается, что может быть у тебя эффект, у тебя нету significant эффекта между теми, кто adopt блокчейн, и теми, кто не adopt блокчейн, потому что ты этого не контролируешь здесь. У тебя смешанные, там это, да, и у тебя смешанная, да, выборка и тех, у кого есть блокчейн, или нету блокчейн. То есть ты как бы пытаешься сказать, что, например, те, кто блокчейн weak, блокчейн strong. То есть как бы коэффициенты у тебя, ты не можешь сравнивать коэффициенты двух, потому что у тебя сравнительная группа смешивает тех, у кого есть блокчейн, и у того, кто нет блокчейна.
Да.
Мое предложение просто было бы попробовать селекцию, там, понимаешь? Или
да, спасибо, спасибо.
Нина Васильевна, давайте я прокомментирую статью, и на этом перейдем к следующей. Не возражаете?
Нет, не возражаю.
Так, Илья, спасибо большое за презентацию. Работа интересная, актуальная, тема требует дальнейшей проработки. Что мне показалось, на что стоит обратить внимание? Вот то, о чем говорил Евгений, в общем-то, нет робастность-чек, нет статистики, непонятно, что за выборка. Вот тяжело читаются модели. Почему? Потому что есть идентификаторы, но нет их разъяснений. Я знаю, что в конце есть слайд, где приведены их разъяснения, ты его не показывал. Но реально лучше смотрится, когда есть комменты прямо на слайде. Следующий момент. Я думаю, что стоит взглянуть еще на одну вещь. Это вероятность дефолта и блокчейн. То есть, ну, скажем так, сколь устойчивы компании с точки зрения введения системы блокчейна. Сейчас была недавно работа Алексея Рыбалка. Я бы советовал посмотреть ее с двух точек зрения. Во-первых, вот как работа, которая выходит на бессовет в вышке, ты в вышке будешь защищаться?
Да.
Ну, вот смысл есть. И второе, оно тоже касается корпоративного управления и моделей, связанных с вероятностью дефолта. Вот. И на будущее, ну, конечно, лучше, когда есть текст для рецензентов, потому что, ну, по статьям в последний момент всегда получаются определенные сложности. А так работа интересная, требует наверняка продолжения. Может быть, стоит вспомнить о России. И, может быть, Emerging Markets, я не знаю, это отдельная песня. Любимая тема Ирины Васильевны как руководителя. То есть ее тоже нужно уважить. Вот. И удачи и выхода на защиту. Все, спасибо.
Ну,
спасибо.
до защиты нам еще далеко. Нам надо
Первый
еще...
год или какой?
Второй.
Второй
год. Ну, не так далеко. Здесь все быстро. Казалось бы, далеко.
Юрий Яковлевич, а у вас нету к нам еще пожеланий, комментов?
Еще пожелаю.
Не мучайте его, он внимательно. Ему тяжелее, чем мне.
Что-то еще пришлете. Вам просто дошлем. Хорошо?
Вы имеете в виду, то есть, прокомментировать? Ну, здесь, да, здесь я на самом деле вот согласен с Евгением. На самом деле тут вопрос в том, что, ну, я, собственно, пытался это тоже сказать, что на самом деле какими-то другими факторами может объясняться присутствие наличия блокчейна, и это будет там как-то влиять на результат, соответственно, надо это как-то проконтролировать. Вот. Ну и здесь, конечно, вот есть такое общее, так сказать, опасение, что на самом деле, ну, это практически получается, что вот как в свое время, там, я не знаю, внедряли там IT-технологии, да, вот, то есть фактически, вот интересно посмотреть, вот те, кто внедрял IT-технологии в свое время, у них как-то тоже были более активные акционеры или нет. То есть вот это будет неким таким аналогом, да, получается, что блокчейн там с этой точки зрения может быть настолько же глобальной сквозной технологией, вот, что вот те, кто вот в свое время внедрял IT, у них тоже вот, например, ну, понятно, что с тех пор там многое поменялось, очень многое, да.
Данные не собирали, я думаю, когда внедряли IT, такие данные не собирали.
Ну или другие какие-то, вот какие-нибудь там, не знаю, веб-сайты, когда стали делать.
Идея красивая.
Да, ну то есть вот.
В дополнение, может...
Еще, может быть,
да.
Извините, Евгений.
Вы говорите, да, я потом скажу.
Я бы еще добавил, что вот робастный чек вот на тех результатах, которые есть, я думаю, что его надо проверять. Вот результаты неоднозначны. Есть две модели, а выводы не совсем одни и те же.
Угу.
А ты пробовал контролировать сектор компании?
Это вот следующий шаг. Это следующий шаг про контроль сектора компании, да.
Да, потому что, да, если как бы предположить, то, наверное, технологичные компании с большей вероятностью адаптируют блокчейны, потому что они просто... Хотя у тебя пример был Сантандера, да, что это банк, да, это менее обычно, да.
Да. Но на самом деле, спасибо большое, да, здесь за комментарий.
Наверное, я предполагал бы, что большинство этих 550 компаний, они на NASDAQ.
А вот знаете, нет, не обязательно. То есть там вот очень много банков, потому что блокчейн, как бы, это очень, ну, вы как человек, который занимается банками, очень, да, это очень релевантно, особенно для кроссграничных банков. То есть когда вам нужно сделать международный перевод денег, settlement, вот.
Ну, банки всегда впереди, тут как бы это понятно.
Да, не, ну очень, очень интересно, там много потенциально интересных результатов. Да.
Ну вот такую статистику по отраслям вообще было бы интересно, это точно. Хорошая идея.
Спасибо.
Ну что, всем большое спасибо. Но мы движемся, у нас еще есть примерно из этой области, то есть из области технологических инноваций. Есть еще одна работа Алины Мяло. Алина, вы еще живы? Вы нас еще слышите?
Да, конечно, я вас слышу. Спасибо большое. Thanks for other presentations. And today I would like you to present some empirical evidence about the initial coin offering and the factors of success of the companies which attracts the financing with this type of initial coin offering. So, a brief executive summary, which is going on in my presentation today. The theme is very actual. Why? Because, for example, if we talking about the previous statistics, the market capitalization of the cryptocurrencies broke out and exceeds this amount of money, which is very big, and the overall statistics from past 5 years tells us that the ICO now may be compare with the VC capital, venture capital of technological companies. So that's why we need to look at this type of the financing. At the same time, there is very contradictory motives of the chosen ICO from the point of view of companies and from point of view of investors. And the main thing is that this type is very speculative and lots of asymmetry of information exists. One more thing which would like to underline is that there's a limited amount of academic studies in this field, and majority of these studies are just some overall or general information about the cryptocurrency, or for example some global parts of the ICO, something like that. That's why we would like to look at the very practical and very empirical task, which factors may influence the success of the ICO, and for which factors investors should look when they look for some project for investing. Okay. For those who do not know what is the initial coin offering, this is the process when company sells some number of digital tokens. In very simple words, we can say that the ICO is a combination of the IPO and crowdfunding. And this is something like the between of these two very classical forms of the financing of companies. Of course, there are some main benefits which you can see on the slide. There is the very low cost for barriers in this market and increasing the transparency, because you can see everything about this company and these projects for the investors. But at the same time, there is a much more amount of some white places in this scheme. For example, the regulation, some very complex technology, if we're talking about the smart contracts, and for example, some platforms. When we're talking about the ICO, of course, we need to talk about the smart contract process. And here on the slide, you can see this very simple scheme of the smart contract process, and I would like to underline also that this smart contract process is on the Ethereum basis, because when you talk about the cryptocurrency, the majority of people think about just Bitcoins or some forks of Bitcoins, but also the Ethereum. This is the main basis for the ICO. Here you can see the two main agents. This is the project side, or the company side, and the investor side. And the contract is very simple. There is some blockchain technology, the capital going from the investors, and so the tokens go to the investors. Of course, when we're talking about the ICO, we cannot compare the ICO with other types of the financing. Here on the slide, you can see some crucial points about this comparison. For example, the ICO may be done with the companies on the first stage of the living of the company, while, for example, IPO is only on some very late stage of the living of the company. So this is not the first round of the investing. Also, the ICO process is very quick. For example, you want to make some project, you go to the special platform, make the smart contracts, then go to the, for example, some exchange or something like that, put, for example, ICO bench, put the project in this platform, and then starts to fundraise. Start to fundraise this money. If we compare the ICO with the crowdfunding, we can see that the mechanism is much more familiar, while from the IPO. But of course, the main question is that the regulation and the level of the risk. So this is the main statistics about the ICO for the first of the ICO in the 2013, and you can see that the statistics is increasing. Actually, there is no statistics from the last year, but it is because the ICO market start to decreasing a bit, but actually the numbers are pretty the same. And you can see some meaningful numbers about the raised amount of money. For example, only one type of the project, which is ICO Telegram, raised big amount of money. But the latest news from the last week, we just know that this type of the ICO closed. But this is again one of the most one of the biggest of this project in this type. And this is the comparison of the ICO, for example, with the VC funds here, and the top 10 biggest ICO projects and how they raised the money. Concerning the geographical position of the ISO, you can see that the majority of the funds goes to the USA. On the second place is China, and then, surprisingly, but this is true, the Russia. And for the industry, of course, this is some IT or development of some infrastructure, then finance, social media, and the last stage is the game industry. Concerning the regulation, actually, there is a very tricky point because, for example, in the 2019, only 24% of countries have any type of the regulation. For concerning the any type, actually, there is some, I think, which is banned and which is accepted. But between these two things, there are different parts of the acceptance of the ISO. For example, okay, we do nothing, it exists, that's the whole thing. Or for example, we just accept some part of the ISO and regulate it. Or for example, we accept just some crypto, but we do not accept the financing part, all this stuff. And here you can see, for example, just for the presentation example, how quickly the regulation changed in different countries. For example, the crucial thing here is example of China, which we're already talking today. And when, for example, in July, there is some ban for different cryptocurrency and also for ISO, and this is one of the biggest market for this type of things. And actually, this is a really stress for the whole market. And this thing may be done in all across the world in any moment. So in, for example, our data sample, we can see that 60 countries allow the ISO and only 9 countries banned ISO. And there is some different these types between two things, some not allowed, but there is some future regulation, legal, regulated, or some severe part of the regulation which is close to the ban. Okay, going on, the contribution to the existing literature is the identification of the factors of the success. If we're talking about all the sphere of the academic research in this field, we can separate the theoretical and empirical research, and you can see some of the biggest parts and the biggest thing which is which they search and study, and some geographical or risk or legal aspects. And the most familiar works for us are the works about the prices, returns of the ISO, volatility, liquidity. And in this type, we try to contribute in this field. Let's turn into this slide. Here, we try to find some existing things in existing literature about the ISO and what they found. For example, one of our hypotheses is the influence of the platform, or which type of the platform and which type of the token the company chooses for attracting the funds through the ISO. And for example, there are some types of these works which talks that Ethereum-based tokens positively affect the ISO valuation, and some these parts. Also, we want to look at the quality of the management and the number of founders and how they influence the success of the ISO, and we found some positive impacts in this thing, and also the market sentiment concerning the social media, Twitter side, and all this stuff. So before the modeling and before the data set, we need to define what is the success for us. And as you can see, there are different approaches for them defining what is the success in the ISO. And for us, we try to measure it by 3 different things. The first thing is the total amount of money raised. The second is the success ratio, and the third is the bench rating. What the total amount raised is very simple thing. We take the project, we take the statistics, how money in USA dollars. So we convert in all the tokens by the exchange rate in the USA dollars and say, okay, this amount of money it raised, so this is the success thing. The second one is the success ratio. What is meant by the success ratio? Actually, you know, when you're talking about the crowdfunding, when you put the project, you also put how much money you need to develop or to start this project. And this is the target sum. The success ratio is the number of funds you raised to the number of your target. So this success ratio means that you can get much more money than you need for the project. And all this stuff we raised in the percentage rates. If it's more than 100, we means that this is the success and gives it 1. If it's not, we give it 0. Why we do this stuff? Because the majority of the, for example, crowdfunding platform make the following things. This is the scheme which all or nothing. If you do not reach the target, you get no money at all. And for example, the biggest crowdfunding platform, which is Kickstarter, do this scheme for the projects which are presented in this platform. That's why we approach the same thing here, and we measure the success ratio in this thing. And the last thing, bench rating. What is it? As the ICO is not going through the underwriting process and do not get some expert rating as companies, which is go, for example, to the IPO, we need some proxy for the rating or for the quality of this project. That's why there is some platform rating. The biggest one is the ICO bench, and on this platform there is the rating for the projects which this platform makes from different types of things. For example, they rate the quality of the team, they rate the idea, they rate also the whole thing, for example, a white paper, the marketing plan, the financial plan, all this stuff. And also there is the rating from some experts. And overall, this stuff is called bench rating. This is called from 1 to 5. And we try to make this also as a success for the project. And so we do 3 different models and try to understand which factors may told us as the company and as for the investor that this project is okay for us. Here you can see something about our hypothesis and about which factors we taken in our models. And the first one and the main thing, we want to understand how the volatility of Bitcoin and how the volatility of the Ethereum affects the probability of the success. And then the availability and the quality of information, of different information, also affect the probability of the success. Here you can see some factors which is called market characteristics, some control variables, for example, ICO characteristics, ratings, and now we're turning to these exact factors, and I'm show you what all this means. But before it, let's talking about our data and how we collect our data. Actually, this is also one of our improving to the existing literature, because the main problem of for all these studies at ICO is that there is no ready data set for these types of studies. So you need to make all this data by yourself, and our process includes 3 stages of the collecting data. First of all, we go into the open resources, and here's some list of these open resources we use for our data collection procedure. Then we go to some mass media and social networks, and we choose only 4 of them because the majority of our projects based in the USA or the Europe countries, and for example, the Big K platform is not appropriate for them. And the last stage, we go to the white papers. This is some proxy like the prospects on the memorandum, for example, in IPO. This is some brochure where you can find all information about these exact projects. And here once more time, this is the description of our Y variable, so our dependent variable. Once more time, in our data sample, we got more than 1,300 companies after all the clearing the data. Before the clearing data, we get exactly 2,000 companies from the ISO, and the majority of the projects in our data sample started in the 2017 and the 2018. We get in our data sample some projects from the last year, but they have some small amount. In our data sample, we got approximately more than 60 countries. On the first place, there are companies from the USA, then Singapore, UK, then Europe, and Russia. This is 5 biggest geographical regions in our data set. Of course, you know that there is 3 types of tokens which companies may give to the investors: some utility token, payment token, something like that. And the majority of the type of the token projects are utility type of the token. And as for the industries, majority of them is business services, then cryptocurrency, and then platform. So and here you can see our independent variables which we use in different modification of our models. As for the financial details and exchange, we use the duration of the ISO, for example, number of currencies which is accepted in different projects. We also do some separate variables which is dummy and gives us the notes whether the fiat money or some simple money is accepted or not, which is very important for the attractiveness for the investors. Also, we introduce the variable about the bonus, traded or not, and also some information about the ISO prices in different types of the days. As for the ISO characteristics, we take some dummy variable for different types of the sectors, and we choose only the biggest type of the sectors. Here you can see them. Then the following thing, as for the location of the countries, type of the token, and type of the platform. As I say at the beginning of my presentation, to make the ICO possible, you need to do the smart contract. So you need to do on some platform. You can choose the Ethereum, so the most popular type of the platform. But nowadays there is different parts of this platform who also provides this possibility to make smart contracts. That's why we also introduce this particular type. And also the dummy about the white paper and know your customer. This is some special requirement about the project which shows some additional information of this. Also about some team characteristics, team size, number of advisors, and we're also interested in the market characteristics. This is the volatility of the three things. This is the Bitcoin volatility, Ethereum, and index CRIX. This is the index of the 30 biggest cryptocurrency together. So we also take this index as we're interested not only in the two biggest type of the cryptocurrencies, but the whole market. And last things, this is the rating characteristics, which I'm previously talking about, bench rating. Here you can see this type of the characteristics. This is team, vision, product, experts. We also take into advantage the number of the experts, because this is very interesting thing. If there is only one expert, how can we take into advantage his mark, for example, rating from the experts in our decision. So these characteristics also helps us to control this effect. And let's looking for the results. As I'm talking about, there are three types of the model. The first is our logarithm of the total amount of the raised money, and there is some different specification. So in one model, we introduce different types of the volatility, week and monthly, and different types of the cryptocurrency, Ethereum, Bitcoin, and this index of the biggest cryptocurrencies. And also there is some modification, because we also step by step include rating for the team, vision, and the product, not at the same time, because there may be some multicollinearity between these types of the variables. That's why we take different specification of the model. So what we find here, actually some results are unexpected and need some advanced analysis. For example, the ICO duration has slightly negative impact. So which means that the longer the ICO is, the harder it is to raise funds. For example, the project locates in inappropriate countries leads to an increase in the ICO period and is a signal of the less willingness to invest. For us, this is surprised that, for example, the bonus and the availability of the white paper or know your customer variable have negative signs. Actually, in our hypothesis, we believe that this is the positive impact in the success, but the logic of the investor is the same as for the ICO duration. If the project is complicated, the founders try to make attractive this project as possible. That's why there is some negative effect of this. Also, as we expect, for example, the availability of the fiat money here have positive effect, which means that there are less risk for investors when he tries to exchange their fiat money to the cryptocurrency, and only after that invest in the ICO project. So they just make one transition, fiat money into the project, and that increase the success of the ICO here. And as you can see, there is some influence of the location. The location is significant only for Russian region and for the Europe region, and this is due to uncertainty of the regulation in these regions. Because, for example, in Russia, there is the law concerning the digital finance, but this law is not approved yet. That's why there is some negative impact of this exact region. And there is unexpected thing because we think that the location in the USA will have some significance here, but actually, despite the fact the regulation of the cryptocurrency in the USA market exists, the variable is not significant here. Let's go to the second model. The second model is about the dummy of the success ratio, and here you can see the marginal effect already for this type of things. And of course, once more time, the volatility of Ethereum or Bitcoin or some index shows the same result as in the previous models, but you can see that, for example, the bonus here is not significant at all, and also the availability of the white paper has very weak influence for the success ratio. As for the sector and the industry, only platform industry here makes some improvement for the model, and as for the location, only UK location helps us. And the last model is the rating of the bench things. Once more time, our volatility significance in all specifications of this model, and you can see that in this type of thing, neither duration nor the fiat money shows us anything which makes the project success. But here, the availability of, for example, the Ethereum as the currency makes some more contribution to the success of this, and also team size and number of advisors. So as we can see, what are the main drawbacks, for example, for these types, and which we can see as the improvement of this work? For example, of course, there is the one side of the procedure you can see here, and there is the limited number of the variables. For example, maybe for some projects and for some effects, we need to make some other proxies, for example. Also, the data set is the self-collection data set. That's why, of course, we have some probably erroneous in our results. Not all possible ICO projects are presented in our data set. Of course, for these empirical results, we are not talking at all for the media coverage here, which is important for the social network, because at this stage, we are not technically we have no technical stuff to get some tweets, for example, on use for these exactly projects. And this is also very important for the ISO. For example, as for the team side and the quality of the team side, we take only 2 characteristics, and probably this is not enough. And we need to talk about some characteristics of the board, which may be some signals for the investors. But of course, for this moment, this is all that we get. And I would like to hear some questions, for example, or also give some advices or give some more drawbacks for our work. Thanks a lot for the attention and for the time. That's all.
Oh, Alina, thank you so much. This is really interesting, and it's also like a big paper, I guess. I have a technical question. Maybe it sounds like a stupid question, but I'm sorry I didn't understand one point.
Mm-hmm.
You are using the slide number 17 when you are showing your model. you are using the variable team size.
Yeah.
What's the argument behind this variable? Why it's important for ICO success?
Yeah. Actually, if we're talking about some success, if we're talking about some crowdfunding or something like that, all we have at the early stage is the team, because actually you invest in the idea or in the people. Because on the early stage of the project, maybe you even have the MVP of this project. That's why we need to take into advantage which people are behind this idea and what are their background and characteristics. As we can give only some not quality, only quantitative variable, then we take the team number and the number of the advisors. So these factors may be improved even by these quality characteristics. For example, how many of these people have the background in the finance or in some technology before they start these ISO projects? As you know, there are some speculated things in all this stuff, and lots of projects are just closed after they raise the funds. And the investors after that looks very, they do not believe in this thing. So they look like the bubble.
Yeah, that's understandable. When you're talking about the quality of people, about the experience, about their background, that's understandable. But my question was about the size.
Because, for example, if we are looking at the white paper, or for example at the profile of the project on the ISO bench, for example, or don't know which site, you can see in some projects there is no information about the team, and this should be the signal for the investors. If there is no information at all, even the number, you need to look very carefully why there is nothing about it.
So do you mean that if you at least have team size, the number of people, nothing else, that's something, that's
something, yeah.
Okay.
That's something, more information, which is okay, there is somebody who make it.
And it's good if the team is larger. And which sign did you get for the team size? You got positive sign.
Yeah, I've got positive sign in this type of the model. I got actually concerning that, for example, that different type, the dummy success, only the number of the advisors is significant here. And about the last model, also positive sign. So the bigger the team, the bigger the possibility that maybe one of the team will do this project.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And of course, for example, in some classical works in the corporate finance, we need some measure about, for example, the size of the company. And as we do not have any financial information, the team size may be some proxy of the of this thing also.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you
can.
Yeah, this topic is sort of very familiar to me too, because I had several master students who tried to do something similar. And my main concern, just it's probably a comment, not even a question. Main concern is that like about the future of this thing. When you compare it to crowdfunding, only with to crowdfunding, I think you should also keep in mind that you should compare it to usual IPOs, because I think as far as I remember, in several countries, even decided not to develop any special regulation for ICO because they consider them as IPOs, some placement. So that's very so. I'm just wondering, did you, at least because for the last several months I didn't look closely to this topic, do you think that ICO has any future? Like, has they, or it will be just the new way, more convenient probably to make an IPO? Like, do they later will have some characteristics of crowdfunding at all, or do they mostly be similar to? Will they be similar to IPOs? What do you think? But based on this blockchain, probably more convenient way.
Okay. Actually, my second article is about some modification of the ICO. You know that last year there is some boom at this market and different modifications starts to raise. For example, there is not only the ICO, but also, for example, initial exchange offering, which means that you are not just the projects like the crowdfunding, as you are right in this field, but for example you are going exactly, for example, to the listing and to the exchange, and this project will definitely on the exchange. There is another modification which is called STO, security token offering. And this type is very familiar to the IPO, exactly this type. And all last year, the SEC in the USA tries to understand about the regulation. And actually, as I know, maybe it changed, that they do not make allowance yet for the STO. And for example, this modification may be very familiar to the IPO in this side, because this is exactly the same thing, but now in some digital things. So now we need to divide ICO as a big thing into several parts. And for example, something which is concerning to the exchange, and for example with this type, and which will be more convenient to the project on the middle part, in the middle stage of their life. For example, STO, which is very very familiar to the IPO, and ICO as itself, which is familiar to the venture capital and the crowdfunding. And that's the different things and different characteristics for the investors and types. As for the future, actually this is a difficult question. And as I see in the last few weeks for the statistics about the ICO, the markets now in some flat segment, so there is no increase in part. And maybe this is because of the market shocks, for example, with the COVID or something like that, in the real life, not with the cryptocurrency, but we can see this thing. I think this cannot be the fully substitute for the IPO, because the idea is different in the nature. So you cannot make, for example, some platform for medicine and go to the IPO if you do not have, and then there is a list of things. You need to go something else, for example, to the venture capitalist, or for example, to the bank, or I don't know where. And for these type of things, the ICO, if the regulation will be done, will be very good thing. And so this is not just a substitute. I think this is different things for different stage of the life of the company.
Yeah.
Maybe I give comment.
Yes.
Yes. The first comment that Alina, as I know, every time don't see for time. It's more than 12 time speech, long speech than in our program. It's very long answer questions, because I think this year she will give her speech to the committee in PhD program. It will be very bad thing, and one of understandable for she maybe understands that she might think about other participation of the conference and so. So it's very big presentation, 29 slides. It's not for 15 minutes. It's not for this format of conference. Second, I think that very important to understand that presentation must be useful for readers. Think for this slide. It's very small letters, and not everyone see these numbers from the presentation. Else, you see variables. You know what this is, but people who saw this first time ask for them, what is it? Previous slide, you have done as understand what dependent variable. It's very not very good for this quality of equations. Else, it needed paper for the conference to give good position for referee. It's too difficult to referee your presentation from the slides. So I must give my comments from the online. And so it's maybe not so good for you. Yes, and the timing is very important for you. You must understand this. I know you not first time. Yes, we contact the previous conference and seminars. It's very important, I think. I have a lot of small comments, but I think I haven't time. So good result for you, and have good presentation in PhD committee this autumn, and finish your work as maybe PhD thesis. But it's need a lot of work more.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Okay, and you already published all these results, are you? Did you?
Yeah. I'm already published this work and also the comparison, as I'm talking about, with the initial exchange offering and this type. And actually, my thesis will develop these things about the default of the ISO and some this stuff. And I am change the model.
Yeah, and what's the topic of the dissertation? What's the
Это очень правильный вопрос, потому что защищаться статьи важно. И будет аттестация на днях. Все должно быть готово. Спасибо.
But the topic is wider than just the determinants of success.
Yeah. It's wider. It's the modeling of the default of the ISO project. So that will be deeper. So this is one thing,
yes.
and then we develop the model of the default. So
Okay.
this is the next step.
Okay, thanks. Good. So according to the program, we have to have some break. And what I think, despite we are more than 1 hour late, because, you know, this is not an easy thing and we didn't want to interrupt any speaker within the conference, I still suggest to have 10 minutes break. Maybe to have some tea, we're at home, so we can have some tea or just, I don't know, maybe some very important calls or something like this.
You don't prepare the tea?
I do, but you know, I can't leave because it's in the kitchen and I'm in the room. I need to go and go back.
Good tea break for all.
Okay, so I think we will start at 7:10, right? Because now we have almost 7. 7:10, be back, please. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Ну что, мы возвращаемся? Александр Маркович уже появился? Коллеги, ну что, мы возвращаемся. И поскольку у нас дискуссант на следующих выступлениях, в основном сейчас Юрий Яковлевич, а он, нам надо понять, он нас слышит уже или нет. Юрий Яковлевич, вы с нами? Нет пока. А Маша уже готова?
Готова.
Угу. Так. Ну что, еще пару минут тогда ждем. Юрий Яковлевич, все-таки дискуссант. Мы надо
Давайте подождем.
Угу. А Маша, а вы в какой аспирантской школе? В экономике?
Да,
А у кого?
образованная.
Угу.
Ну, исследование, про которое я сейчас буду рассказывать, оно напрямую не связано с темой диссертации, это такое спутниковое.
Угу. А тема какая диссертация?
По структурным продуктам. Структурные продукты и структурное финансирование.
Так, извините, я тут опоздал. Да.
Okay, then we are going to continue. So the first is Maria Tkachenko. Okay.
Do you see my presentation?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So my investigation is devoted to company's life after IPO. By life, I mean company's financial efficiency represented by key financial ratios. This investigation is still a work in progress, so now I'm going to speak about preliminary results, the idea of investigation, and I will try to represent it in maximal user-friendly form.
Okay.
There are a lot of researches which investigate companies' post-IPO dynamics, but the vast majority of researches concentrate on IPO underperformance phenomena or post-IPO stock price dynamics or liquidity. And there are really few researches which pay attention to the dynamics of key financial ratios and key financial multipliers. Speaking about Russian market, there are, as well as I know, there are no attempt to estimate the change in financial ratios after IPO in comparison with pre-IPO values. So the key novelty of my investigation is that I'm going to estimate the change in financial efficiency of Russian companies after IPO in comparison with pre-IPO level. The main goal of my research is to examine the dynamics of three chosen key financial ratios of Russian issuers after IPO. I'm going to talk about these key financial ratios in details. and then find the main factors which influence on companies' financial ratios efficiency after IPO. There are three key objectives of my research. First, I'm going to analyze the dynamics of key financial ratios over the period from 1 year before an IPO to 3 periods after IPO, and estimate how these ratios change after IPO. Then I'm going to estimate how pre-IPO values and exchange of IPO depend on dynamics of companies' ratios after IPO. And finally, I'm going to compare profitability ratios such as return on assets after IPO with average industry ratios. As I have already said, there are few researches devoted to post-IPO dynamics of financial ratios. If we are speaking about Russian market, there are no researches. If we are speaking about other markets, there are the largest research which was conducted by US researchers in 1994 and which analyzed the dynamics of post-IPO ratios for large sample of US companies. Besides, there are researches which was conducted on emerging markets, for example, China market, Thailand market, Indian and Brazilian market. If we look at these researches, we will see that most of researchers concentrate on two types of ratios. The first type is ratio which related to assets, for example, return on assets, which is the most popular financial ratio in these articles. And second type of multipliers related with earnings, for example, price to earnings ratio or earnings per share. Besides, there are several researches which based on return on working capital and return on sales after IPO. According to all of these investigations, there is a significant downward trend in all financial ratios after IPO in comparison with its level before an IPO. There are four main hypotheses. There are four main results which try to describe why financial ratios decrease after IPO. First hypothesis is hypothesis about window dressing. By window dressing, we mean that when companies is going to conduct an IPO, managers have a chance to intentionally overestimate key financial results in order to make company more interesting for potential investors. The second hypothesis is that at the beginning of IPO, companies is overheated, which means that company may be at the peak of its business circle. So after IPO, we will see an inevitable decrease in financial ratios, because before IPO the company was overheated. The third hypothesis is that IPO inevitably lead to dramatic change in ownership structure, so it could be result in the conflict of interest between initial ownerships and new shareholders. And the first hypothesis is closely related with the third hypothesis. Higher free float hypothesis means that if free float was higher at the moment of IPO, it will result in even more dramatic changes in ownership structure, and as a result in more dramatic conflict of interests. And conflict of interest means future problems with key problem solutions. Just tell me about the sampling. The main problem I faced was that there are really few IPOs in Russian market. In comparison with both US market and emerging markets. On the first step, there was non-adjusted sample consisted of 124 IPOs conducted on Russian market over the period from 1996 to 2014. All of these IPOs, this sample was formed using such sources as Bloomberg, PricewaterhouseCoopers research, or different other sources. Then we use specific adjustment criteria to initial sample. First, most of the issuers' assets should be situated in Russia in order to be aware this company is really Russian company, Russian IPO. Then investors should be attracted throughout the book building procedure, and the shares should be publicly traded after IPO. Then at the moment of sampling, company should be leave or shouldn't or has not been defaulted or delisted. And one of the main criteria was the issuer couldn't be a bank, because there are specific financial ratios for bank which are different from financial ratios for another non-banking and non-financial companies. And finally, we need IFRS financial statements, so we could use only companies which has IFRS financial statements over the period from 1 year to IPO, 1 year before an IPO to 3 years after available in an open sources. And final sample consisted of 75 IPO conducted on Moscow exchange or another foreign exchange over the period from 202 to 214. This diagram represents the structure of final sample. It can be seen from the diagram that there is significant upward trend in quantity of IPOs on Moscow exchange and in foreign exchange conducted by Russian companies over the period from 202 to 207. And then there is a significant decrease due to financial crisis, and then we see a significant downward trend in total quantity of IPOs over the period from 210 to 214. And we can also see that from 211 there are really few IPOs conducted on Russian exchange. Only one IPO in 211 and one in 213. This pie chart diagram represents the total structure of companies by exchange, and it could be seen that there is 44% of IPOs conducted on Russian exchange, 37 IPO conducted on foreign exchange, for example, London Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange or Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And there are 90% of IPOs which was conducted on both Russian and foreign exchange. This slide represents the key moments of methodology. In our research, we use 3 key financial ratios. First of all, we use EBITDA margin, then we use profitability of sales and return of assets. We exclude all financial ratios related with earnings, because earnings could be manipulated by managers, so this ratio is not representative. The period of observation is from 1 year before an IPO to 3 years after IPO. We exclude the year of IPO because there are IPOs conducted in January, there are IPOs conducted on December, and it is hard to understand how the results of this year depend on IPO, which was conducted on the year of year or in the end of year. To estimate prevailing tendency, we use median value of each of chosen ratios, which estimated as a difference between the ratio level in year t and the same ratio level in the year t-1. According to the results of previous exchanges and Russian market specific, we post 4 hypotheses. First, we consider that financial ratios will decrease our 3 years after IPO, according to results on emerging market and US market. Then we consider that there will be no relation between free float and financial ratios IPO, because on Russian market, the situation when companies managers and companies shareholders are the same people is more seldom than on USA. Then we consider that companies which conduct an IPO on only Russian exchange are companies with the weakest financial results, because if a company wants to make an IPO on foreign exchange, it should have big financial results. So we think that if a company have an ability to conduct only Russian IPO, it has not so high ratios as in other companies which can conduct a cross listing. And finally, we posit that there is a negative relation between pre-IPO value of ratio and its dynamics after IPO, because we agree with hypothesis about companies, about overheated companies which conduct an IPO on the peak of business cycle. This slide represents graphical analysis of 3 ratios after IPO. It can be seen from all three graphs, that there is a decrease in all of 3 ratios over the period from a year before and after, or before an IPO, or year 1 after an IPO, and its dynamics in the following years. The most dramatic downward trends could be seen if we are talking about return on assets. Then we divide initial sample into 3 subsamples. The first sample represents the median value of each of 3 ratios on a sample of companies which conduct an IPO only on Russian exchange. It can be seen that there is a significant difference between the level of ratio on some sample of only Russian IPOs and subsample of companies which conduct an IPO on foreign exchange or cross-listing. Then we estimate the regression in order to understand is a dependence between the level of each of ratios before an IPO and exchange of IPO and following post-IPO dynamics of ratios exist. The regression, we estimate the following regression, where indicator growth mean an increase in ratio value of the period from year before an IPO to T, which T is first, second, or third years after IPO. Indicator base value means the value of ratio for issue of the period, the value of ratio for issue before an IPO in year -1. And exchange rush is a dummy variable which is equal 1 if issuer conduct an IPO only on Russian exchange, and equal 0 if an issuer conduct an IPO on foreign exchange, or if it has cross-listing. When we run the regression, we find that there is a negative relation, there is a significant negative relation between the effect of IPO conducted only on Russian exchange and dynamics of profitability of sales ratio and return of assets ratio over the first year after the IPO. And this relation is significant by 10% level. Then we find that there is a negative relation between pre-IPO level of the same ratios and the dynamics over the period from year of IPO to 3 years after IPO. And this relation is significant by 1% level. But there is no significant influence of possible factor variables on the post-IPO dynamics of EBITDA margin. And finally, we estimate the influence of free float at the moment of IPO on the post-IPO dynamics of ratios. On the first step, we use graphical analysis. It can be seen from these diagrams that there is a difference between median value on a subsample of IPOs which have free float upper than 19%. 19% is a median value of free float over the all initial sample. And then we run Wilcox and Signet-Rank test. According to result of this test, we find that there is significant by 5% level difference between median values on two subsamples. Subsample of IPOs which have free floats upper than 90%, and free floats we have IPO on we have free float lower than 90%. And finally, we try to estimate a difference between issuers ratios after IPO and its average industry ratio at corresponding year. We estimate only profitability of sales and return on assets. There was no estimation for EBITDA margin. And we find that profitability of sales ratios are in average above than industry average ratios. It can be seen from the first diagram. And return on assets ratio are below industry ratios at the second and third years after IPO. So finally, we find that four key results. First, we find that all of financial ratios we have chosen demonstrate decrease over the period from 1 year before an IPO to 3 years after an IPO. And the most dramatic decrease was in return on assets. Second, we find that issuers which have the highest free float demonstrate the most dramatic decrease in financial ratios after IPO. Then we find that if a company conduct an IPO only on Russian exchange, it led to a negative dynamics of it led to most dramatic negative dynamics of profitability of sales and return on assets over the period from after the IPO to the 30 years after the IPO. And finally, we find that issues which has the highest pre-IPO value of ratio demonstrate the most dramatic decrease in this ratio after IPO. So if we switch to the hypothesis we pose in the start of our investigation, we find that first, third, and third hypothesis couldn't be rejected, and the second hypothesis could be rejected. There are two possible ways for future research, because this research is still work in progress. First, I'm going to increase the period of observation after IPO from 3 to 5 years, because it will be more representative. And then I'm going to find out another factors, another from exchange and pre-IPO level of ratio, which are responsible for decrease in EBITDA margin, because all factors we use couldn't describe the dramatic decrease in EBITDA margin over the period after IPO. That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, guys. Thank you, Maria, for the presentation. And I do expect there are some questions. Then I have two questions. The first one is, I noticed you didn't control for the use of funds which have been collected in the IPO. And can you then explain why? Why you didn't check for the purposes and for the particular uses of funds?
I can describe it as because when I started this research, there was a lot of problems to find out full information about all IPOs, and there are a lot of IPOs in my sample which have no information about total volume of IPO, or they have information which differ from one source to other. In the future research, I could investigate this question in more details and try to use the size of IPO as additional factor variables.
And my second question is to some extent related to the first one. Few years ago, I even do not remember how many years has passed. We made with my master degree student the paper, which is already published in the journal, electronic journal of corporate finance research, which is HSE journal. It's online, it's in PDF and free access. So we made the research at least a little bit similar to yours, but the major goal was to understand the performance, operational performance after IPO, yes. But our paper is really very different from yours because we split it IPOs into different parts. The first type of IPO is just simply to capitalize the existing stock. Just those owners, already existing owners, they are selling their own shares, partially or even just in a high proportion, to outsiders during the IPO. So the company mostly is focused on the problem how existing shareholders may get the money back from their own shares. And in this particular situation, almost there is no capital expenditure or some investment project, long-term project, which cannot explain why they raised all these funds. So the only explanation is that the owners wanted to get some money back. and they initiated and voted for IPO. But the second type of IPO is just regular IPO when you are raising funds because you have an idea of some capital expenditure, you have an efficient project, and you immediately invest them. Why I'm asking this, I asked you the first question, you didn't control for this. And you also showed that the dramatic change, the most dramatic change was in return on assets. Maybe it's explained because, partially at least, by capital expenditures that they initiated, and then the assets base already increased, but still there was no adequate increase in the return because this is long-term project. So I would like to recommend you that you need to understand the nature of the IPO, the purpose of the IPO, not just financial ratios and some metrics which can illustrate the operational efficiency. You do get it?
Thank you. I will investigate the article you are talking about.
Because it was some years ago, I even do not remember, maybe 7 years or just so.
I will find it.
Okay, this is very important to split the types of IPO to make a judgment about the efficiency. Because the first type of IPO, it even doesn't aim at some increase in performance. It aims, on the contrary, to get money, liquid money, to give to shareholders, which created that business, which currently own some shares. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Then it's useless to think in terms of performance after IPO because there was no goal to increase the efficiency, almost no goal at all.
Thank you.
Okay. Some other questions, guys? Then I will ask Yuri Yakovlevich to give his...
I have one question, if I may.
Okay, Yuri, please.
I would like to comment on decrease on EBITDA margin. I've seen that a very large amount of IPOs happened before crisis, and it could be linked to this, that cycle, maybe nature, that you have hot market, then you have crisis, and after crisis you naturally have lower operating performance, and that's why you may have such a decreasing EBITDA margin and profitability a few years after IPO, because you have a lot of IPOs in 2006 and 2007 years. Maybe you should look at this direction also.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it could be an explanation. Thank you for comment.
Yuri Yakovlevich, please step in.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. Indeed, the last comment was really, I think, really interesting, because indeed, when you do such research, you probably need to control for these waves of IPO and the stage where the market is. Probably you have to control even for some general macroeconomic situation, like during these years 2006, 2007, EBITDA margins were much higher, because not only because it was like time before crisis, but also at the time and later on, the costs increased at a very high speed, and this you can estimate using, for example, production pricing index compared to just regular inflation, and you can see that production pricing moved so fast at that time and this caused significant decrease in EBITDA, and that could cause after the crisis the EBITDA remained much lower than it was before. Regarding the overall, yes, so the main probably comment follows the idea that you should definitely control for overall situation in the market, and this should be implemented in your research. Also, I like the comment of Irina Vasilievna, because indeed many IPOs were used to sort of as an exit strategy for a main shareholder, and of course this should be taken into account, especially for like early time, like for before the crisis, or many IPOs, yeah, and some of IPOs they were used for indeed some expansion, some capital, so some capital rising. So indeed, that this is also a very important issue and should be addressed in the paper. What is strange that you somehow you put together the IPOs in the Russian and foreign markets. I know that you control for this, but still these IPOs were very different in nature, I would say, because at this stage the Russian market was not so developed, and it was much easier to get some capital in the foreign markets and exchanges. After some time the situation completely changed. So after the crisis, the problems with the listing on foreign markets became really strong. So that's why since then Russian market became much more attractive for some IPOs. I would say that your conclusions are not really explain what happened with those IPO, and because you obtained some results, but you don't explain them. You as Irina Vasilievna likes to say, you don't provide any implications of your research, because you mentioned the window dressing, other reasons what happened during the IPO, and you don't make any conclusions about this. So probably many companies used this window dressing, and they inflated their financials before IPO, and then after this they just they obtained such results because of this issue. Also, there was once in late just before the crisis, I would say, many companies, the market was so hot that the companies sold their stories, like when they try to attract money at very low cost, and the expected return was so low for that time. So you can even try to check if you can find the old financial reports, that the actual valuation of those companies with the appropriate level of the discount rate, you might see that the valuation was higher many times than the valuation using usual DCF models. So that could be also the case of either hot market of IPO, probably some window dressing, I don't know, some other issues as well. So you should somehow make more like more implications of from your study. And yeah, that's my other general comment. Okay, so far I think the study is interesting, but you should cover more literature. Yeah, and there are some publications in Russia, and Irina Vasilevna was active in this topic as well some time ago. So I guess you should look for some papers here as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for recommendations.
Okay, congratulations, you are done, and now we are switching the floor to Parmenas.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me share my screen. So can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Good evening. I'm Parmenas. I study in the Southern Federal University of Russia. I'm a PhD student, and my topic is, this presentation is about stock market reaction to news of unethical behavior in the real sector. I have divided this presentation in my abstract in objectives. Of course, we seek to understand how publications of news of unethical behavior affect stock prices. We use the method of event analysis. This method has been used before for a lot of time to look into the change, to calculate abnormal returns. And we use what we call abnormal return calculator. It's just an app. We feed in the data and find, and after we feed in the data, we find, we get the results, various statistical results. I see that section of my presentation is hidden, so let me do like this. The result shows that 6 of the firms that we investigated, there is a significant effect of publication of news of unethical behaviors to stock prices. And as a result of these findings, we recommend that the company should adopt a very good strategy such as find different information. So, but generally, we can see that generally a lot of researchers conclude that various stock markets and various investors, they respond to environmental news, to news of ethical lapses, and so on and so forth. So given that different markets react different to news of different unethical behaviors, it would be important to understand first of all how different markets react to various industries, and also it would be important to understand how various ethical lapses have affected firm value in the past. Just like I explained about the methodology, we have 2 hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that there is no abnormal return surrounding publications of news of unethical behavior. And another hypothesis, positive, the alternative hypothesis, of course, is that there exists abnormal returns upon publication of unethical behavior. We get our data from Yahoo Finance. And also we obtain what we call Farmer and French factors, because we use the Farmer and French 3-factor models to calculate the abnormal returns. And when we get this data, the data about the farm stock prices and also the Farmer French data, we use abnormal return calculator to calculate the abnormal returns. So what we do is that we prepare 3 files, one called the request file, another one called the farm data files, and another one called the market data file to look at that has data towards the that has data about the market. That is the S&P 500 is the market index that we used. And of course, the data about the farms it involves the data, the farm data that we corrected. So after we did this analysis, the app provided us with various statistical results, which includes the abnormal returns, aggregated abnormal returns, and cumulative aggregated abnormal returns. So just to look at some ethical lapses news that we investigated. First, we have 8 companies, as we see. Some of them are in the manufacturing sector, like the Boeing. We also have Kobe Steel. We also have Siemens and Volkswagen. And BP, of course, BP is in the oil sector. And we have 2 firms in the IT sector, that is Apple and Facebook. We can assume Facebook is in the information technology. So this event happened from the period, the earliest event happened in the 2006. That was an event involving Siemens, where Siemens staff Siemens staff offices were raided by investigators who were investigating fraud, misappropriation of funds, rather. And the latest one, of course, was an event in 2019 where Boeing was accused of overlooking the security of their latest model. So to investigate this, of course, we use the event study methodology, and our event study window has got 21 days. We use 21 days event window where we look, day 0 represent the day of the event, and we have 10 days before the event and 10 days after the event, and 120 days estimation window. And we use that to calculate the cumulative abnormal returns. So you can see here data of different firms, or the 8 firms, and their corresponding cumulative abnormal returns. This thickest value is actually the Z value of that we got from the app. And what is important to note with this value is that we are looking at a threshold of plus or minus 2 to show whether the data is significant or is not significant. So when you find a firm like Apple, which is negative 1.0, this figure is not significant. So we can conclude that these results are not significant. But when you compare that to a figure like for Boeing or BP or for Equifax Credit Bureau or for Kobe Steel, whose figures are above plus or minus 2, these figures are significant. So what you can see here is that the results for 4 firms are significant. That is BP, Equifax, Credit, Boeing, and Kobe Steel. And the results for other 4 firms are not significant. We can represent this in a graph. What you see is that most firms, after the 0 would represent the event day. The minus 10 represent 10 days before the event. And on the other hand, plus 8, it represents days after the event. So you can see here, in the time period, after day 0, we find we find the cumulative abnormal returns reducing, cumulative abnormal returns falling and falling and falling, and average abnormal return itself also it's fluctuating. But you can see the cumulative abnormal returns is reducing after day 0. But it is important here to note that among these firms whose cumulative abnormal returns is negative after the event, 2 of them, that is Apple and Facebook, from the previous table, their results were not significant. Apple and Facebook, because they have a figure that is negative, that is less than plus or minus 2. So their results are not significant. But for BP and Equifax, the results are insignificant. So we could argue that maybe we need to look into the behavior of firms that are in the IT sector, like Apple and Facebook, and see whether they are largely affected by publication of news of unethical behavior. Of course, we used very little data, so we cannot right now conclude this. We would need more research into investigating this. And if we look at other examples of the firms we investigated, we find that Boeing and Kobe Steel also, they have their cumulative abnormal returns being negative after the event, and Volkswagen and Siemens being not affected at all by the event, because you can see even after the event, day 0, they still continue to enjoy cumulative abnormal returns, positive cumulative abnormal returns. They record positive data, positive CAR even after the event day. However, in these 2 cases, these results are not scientifically significant. Again, I take you back to this table here, and you can see that the Z value for Siemens and for Volkswagen is below our threshold of plus or minus 2. So again, it is not, the data it is not significant. So if we look at the results, the aggregate result, the results in total of the aggregated 8 firms, we get a value of negative 3.24644, and this value is lower than plus or minus 2. That is the generally accepted level of freedom. And so we can conclude that this is significant, and therefore we can reject our null hypothesis that said that these results are, that our null hypothesis here that was saying that the abnormal returns are surrounding the publication of, that there are no abnormal returns surrounding the publication of news of firms unethical behavior. If we discuss these results further, what we have seen so far is that the aggregated cumulative abnormal return for 8 firms across the event window is negative. When you put all of them together, it's negative. But this statistical test confirms that stock prices respond to publication of news of unethical behaviors. And other researchers have reached this conclusion, people like Cormier and Aloche and other research. We also note the contradiction that we said earlier, that in Italian farms, there was not, the researchers did not find significant relationship between ethics and stock prices. They found a significant relationship between environmental news and stock prices, but not between ethics and stock prices. So we have seen 2 different reactions. We have seen 2 different reactions about 6 firms. 6 of the 8 firms having a positive, 6 of the 8 firms having a positive, a negative, having a negative CAR after the event day, and 2 firms having a positive CAR after the event day. And we can also see that some of the results were not significant, and some results were significant. Some were not significant, some were significant. So what we can conclude is that it is important for firms to adopt a corporate strategy that would address reputation among its various stakeholders, both investors and other interested parties, so that they can build trust and confidence with stakeholders with time. We can say that further research is needed, first of all, to investigate the effect of social responsibility aspects, such as environmental and frown and transparency and human rights. So each of these aspects need to be investigated, because you can see, for example, literature says that in some markets, one aspect is significant or is material, and other aspect is not material. We also note that in this case, we find that Apple and Facebook, they show that they had negative cumulative abnormal return, but the results are not significant. So we would also want to see more research in area of concentrating on firms in IT sector and find whether they are affected by publication, by ethical lapses. I can confirm that currently I'm researching as well currently into the Russian market on this very topic. I'm looking into the ESG rating, that is environmental, social, and governance rating, to see if the Russian firms are affected by various aspects of corporate social responsibility, be it environmental, social, and a governance aspect. These are some references I put, and I thank you for your attention. I would take some industrial firm. And one of the aspects of information disclosure that I'm looking into is the information on corporate social responsibility. Yes. Especially now that in Russia, the many firms are starting to use to produce sustainability original from Kenya. Kenya. Yes.
I saw that you have.
I made some network. So
okay.
I'm authoring this paper with Dmitry Shevchenko is my supervisor. And this is my friend in Portugal. She's also a lecturer in the Faculty of Economics in Aveiro, Portugal. I went there for Erasmus program. That's how we met.
Okay, thank you. But at the same time, I have some questions on your topic. I like your presentation, but I still have some questions. The first question is why you selected Pharma French to calculate normal returns. What were the arguments?
What argument? I selected Pharma French model because it takes into consideration a lot of aspects when calculating abnormal returns, because most researchers they choose just the market model to calculate abnormal returns, but market model does not control for factors like the firm size and factors like leverage, effect of leverage. They call them externalities. Yeah. They are not controlled in other models, but the Pharma French model controls for these externalities. That's why I choose it. I choose it also because because I was dealing with these mostly farms that are in Europe and US, and the farmer French data is largely available in about the European market, about the American market. It would be tricky for if I was researching on Russian farm, because I don't have data as of now on Russian farms, but because the data was available and the model controls for these anomalies, that's why I choose it.
Okay, but you said you were planning to expand your research.
Yes.
But you just have very few companies, and that's the second question.
Yes.
Why is your sample so narrow, so small? You didn't have enough time to collect many events, or what was the reason? It's really too small.
Yeah, it's really too small. I think I have only 8 companies. I just was concentrating on large ethical lapses that would cause some significant notice, that could create notice in the investors community. But I think it would be wise for me to increase in future, to expand these my companies to cover more and more firms.
And the third question, you said you are writing on disclosure.
Yes.
And I'm a little bit surprised. Did you control whether those companies, before the event, they have the experience and they have the tradition in disclosing widely in their annual reports this non-financial information? Are those investors who are investing just in these companies, are they used to non-financial information already, because the companies are issuing non-financial reports, or they are not?
I would say that most of these companies, especially for events that happened from 2017, 2018, 2019, those companies issue sustainability report, they issue non-financial report, but these things that this event that happened are events that they could not reveal in their reports, things like if you look at something like Facebook, it is a data breach aspect, not protecting users' data. Things like Apple not providing full information about their business operations. They are throwing down some models of their phones, but they are not disclosing this to their users. And then someone takes them to court and they lose the case, and people are worried about this. So they publish sustainability report, but some of these cases they cannot include it in the report.
Okay. Yes. And I also have a proposal to you.
Yes.
Because I'm a head of the School of Finance.
Yes.
I have a power, a little administrative power. Yes. And we have different databases. We have Bloomberg.
Yes.
We have Thomson Reuters, Econ. We have many others. Yes. And it would be useful to you to get an access through our School of Finance.
Yes.
Because nowadays, due to COVID, we have already distant access.
Yes.
Please, after this seminar, write me in an email.
Yes.
And I will forward it to our person who is analyst, yes, working with the databases, to give you distant access to collect the data, especially if you are going to run ESG ratings. Sustainalytics, it exists in Bloomberg, in Thomson Reuters, you will get much more data. Then in this case, maybe you can also change your model. I mean, Pharma French, of course, that's nice, it's 3-factor model, but you can also check with some Bloomberg cost of equity model. and try to find the data in Bloomberg, okay?
Okay.
I would like to suggest to you to stay in touch with our School of Finance.
Yeah,
And my second proposal is 10 years ago, I established the electronic journal,
yes.
which is the High School Economics Journal,
Yes.
which is called Journal of Corporate Finance Research.
Yes.
And Yuri Dranev, who is going to make some comments on your paper, helped me a lot a few years ago when he was, let's say, the secretary for the journal, who was coordinating the authors and the editors of the journal.
Yes.
So in our university, this journal is it is recognized
Yes.
for publications for PhD students in our PhD school.
Okay.
So that's my second proposal, that you can look at the journal page. We have 4 issues per year,
Yes.
each quarter, and you then can submit some of your papers. Again, if you stay in touch with us, we will explain you our requirements, so on and so forth, okay?
But for now, I will give you feedback on the paper. Is that correct?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
For now, I would wait for your comments on the paper.
Not for my comment, but for comment of Yuri Dranev. He's next.
After I receive my comment, then I can go to the journal and...
Yes, yes, okay.
That would be very useful.
Okay. Yuri Yakovlevich, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you for presentation. So, yeah, it's really difficult to have a discussion after Irina Vasilevna, because she almost highlighted all the issues about the paper. So yes, the topic is really interesting, and yeah, it's sort of I would say modern topic. All these ESG issues and ethical issues becoming more and more important. And I think, yeah, the main disadvantage was already said by Irina Vasilevna, that the sample is very small, and I would add that you probably should specify very clearly what do you mean by so-called ethical event, because the situation with BP, for example, it was more like a technological disaster or something. It wasn't probably the ethical issue. You should be very clear how you specify these type of events, and how you how you define them. So another thing I would add, that you probably should not only try different models for event study, as Irina Vasilevna suggested, not only for math range, compare results with different model to check for robustness. Also, you can try to look at different event windows, and probably try to catch long-term effects as well, because as far as I understand, you look only at 20 days windows, right? So you can change the event window and compare the results and see what's going on. Yeah, and definitely all these things you should do on a much larger sample. Otherwise, it's just not really really supports your conclusions regarding the overall effect of these ethical issues. That's my main suggestions, and but I think the topic is interesting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. I really appreciate. I will work on the on improving my work using your advice.
Thank you. And stay in touch after the workshop.
Okay, okay.
Okay. And now we invite Anastasia Saltykova.
Good evening.
Mhm.
Good evening, dear colleagues. My name is Anastasia Saltykova. I would like to present the results of our research with Agata Lazinska in this year of financial economics. Our initial topic is about structural instability of Russian stock market. At the moment, we have shifted focus from structural breaks and rolling operation to stock market to stock market regimes and Markov regime switching model. First, let's begin with the idea of this research. The global economic system is definitely changing over time as a result of changing production, trade between the countries, changing political regimes, even in climatic conditions. This does not bypass the stock markets, which are an integral part of the system. Stock market is changing. Stock market is changing. It has own stock market regimes. The idea of cyclical nature of economics and financial indicators is confirmed by many researchers. Why it has happened? It could be some unobservable and immeasurable factors, measurable factors such as psychological, sociological aspect of investors' behavior, the presence of implicit interventions in the functioning of the stock market, some news or local natural disasters. This is reflected in the change in expected returns, condition volatility, and correlation in the stock market. These regimes or stages of stock market development are hard to witness. In different stock markets, there are different regimes. The Markov regime switching model, this class of models, take into account such immeasurable factors and identify such regimes. Then we can understand how the influence of fundamental factors change from one regime to another. Why do we focus on fundamental factors? Fundamental factors has great significance in macroeconomic forecasting, in particular in early warning system for financial crisis. It was revealed that some fundamental factors are good signals for identifying systematic risk in the Russian market. For example, the oil price is one of the indicators of credit risk. Therefore, before we using such fundamental factors for forecasting, it's important to detect current regimes in the stock market and what regimes will arise in the future. So the key goal of this paper is to detect how stock market regimes function with the case of Russian stock market. That regimes exist in Russian stock market and how many of them, how the fundamental factors change their influence from one regime to another. For this research, we use daily data from the official statistical reports. Here you can see it. They are available for the from 2003 to 2011. It is daily data of the Marx Russian index and fundamental factors. Indexes, interest rate, and exchange rate and oil price. Because time series describe of are non-stationary, we transform them. We use slope return of stock market indexes, oil price, exchange rate, and the first differences of interest rate in the Russian Federation and the USA, which is stationary based on the ADF test and Phillips parent test. In this paper, we investigate how stock market regimes function with the case of Russian stock market by utilizing the Markov regime switching model. It is based on the assumption that the influence of financial factors in the stock market may move across different volatility regimes. We use two-stage and three-stage Markov switching model based on the previous researchers. In particular, Moore detects that there are 2 or 3 volatility states for the emerging stock market. And we also used two-stage model. Here you can see the equation. Dependent variable is the Marx Russian index, and the independent variable are fundamental factors mentioned before. Since the trading session in New York opens later than trading in Moscow, only the previous day of the previous day's S&P returns can be used in regression explaining stock markets return in Moscow. Well, the K 225 is taken without a lag of 1 day, since the trading session in Japan is closed before Moscow trading session opens. Here you can see the empirical results, two-stage Markov regime switching models. The influence of fundamental factors in the two regimes differs. Size of a statistically significant coefficient do not change from one regime to another. However, the power of influence fundamental factors and their statistical significance changes. For example, S&P 500 becomes statistically significant only in the second regime. In the three-stage Markov regime model, we see more detailed changes on it is a three-stage Markov switching models, and we see more detailed changes. And the next slide, we can see a comparative analysis of the results. The influence of Marx Russian index for the previous trading day is statistically significant. Statistically significant, we can see negative effect. And it is practically independent on the stock market regime. However, the power of the influence is decreasing from 1 to 2 regimes. What about the oil price? The oil price has a statistically significant positive effect on the Marx Russian index of the current trading day. However, the power of influence is decreasing from 1 to 2 regimes. and these factors is statistically insignificant in free regimes of stock market. What about K? K is always positive and statistically significant. It is practically independent on the stock market regimes. However, the power of influence is decreasing from 1 to 2 and 3 regimes. Here you can see the positive sides. It is tells about the positive significant influence if you in color. If we see 2 positive sides, it is interpreted as that the influence higher than the next period, for example. S&P 500 has a statistically significant positive effect of a max Russian index of the current trading day in the first stock market regimes. The interest rates of Russia has a significant, statistically significant negative effect. However, this factor is statistically insignificant in 2 or 3 regimes of the stock market. Exchange rates and interest rate of the USA is not statistically significant here. Using 3 regimes rather than 2 regimes allows us to detail the change in the influence of fundamental factors. And 3 stock market regimes can be interpreted as the low, medium, and high volatility, how it was in some previous research. What about conclusion? The results indicate that the existence of 2 or 3 regimes of functioning of the stock market, for which different behavior of the coefficients of the fundamental factors is observed. Using 3 regimes rather than 2 allows us to detail the change in the influence of fundamental factors depending on the low, medium, and high volatility of the stock markets. The influence of fundamental factors on the max Russian index is not constant. Size of statistically significant coefficient do not change, switching from one regime to another. However, the power of influence change, and the influence of K is always positive and statistically significant. It is important to detect the current stock market regime in which regime will arise in the future. So we can better understand how fundamental factors will change their influence on the stock market in the near future, and we will be able to use them for macroeconomic forecasting. So if we see that there is some changes in the investor behavior in the market, it is reflected in the change of stock market volatility. It indicates that the stock market regime is changing. We need to understand what current stock market regime and what regimes will arise in the near future. If we know this, we will understand how influence of fundamental factors will change. But it is important because fundamental factors are used for macroeconomic forecasting. So that is the final conclusion for this presentation. Thank you for your attention. Please some comments, maybe suggestions, questions. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have questions? Yuri Yakovlevich, maybe you have some questions.
Little.
Very difficult, Yakovlevich. And it's great pleasure for him
Yeah.
to his visit our PhD seminar.
Yeah, he's still with us. He's waiting for his last
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Comments. Okay. Alexander
Yes.
Markovich, please.
Yes, okay.
Your comments.
It's difficult to Yuri Yakovlevich. He must give next comment. Colleague, I think that's interesting topic. Here is a point of for research, and I think it's first results, which may be give, and the authors may give next result during next 1-2 years. I think that it's very important to Anastasia to have participation in conference seminars, because maybe next presentation is better and more careful. But I understand that in Perm, it's now night, yes, Anastasia?
Approximately.
Approximately.
And so it's maybe not more energy in your presentation. I think that here is correct instruments, correct models, and what must be done, it's go forward and give you result for next conference. Good luck. It's all.
Alexander Markovich, how do you think? Would it be useful for Anastasia, at least online, to join online the November workshop if it happens? If it happens online, then no problem. If it happens offline.
Я по-русски скажу.
Да.
Да. Я думаю, что нет, это не системные риски. Это все же немножко другая тематика. А вот в следующем году на конференции, может быть, даже на большую, раз. Второе, коллеги, для всех, кто меня слушает сейчас, в декабре планируется Российский экономический конгресс. Там будет, кроме всего, молодежная конференция. Вот туда, я думаю, да. И вместе со своим руководителем, Агатой Лозинской. Я говорил Агате об этом, скажите, напомните.
Спасибо большое.
And good luck.
Thank you very much.
Мне что добавить?
Конечно, на русском как следует.
Да, что-то можно сказать по-русски, действительно. Ирина Васильевна, как вы считаете?
Можно и по-русски, да.
Да.
Все уже устали.
Наш
Наш коллега из Кении немножко понимает по-русски, он слышит нас, да.
Да, так что вполне можно.
Ну, действительно, тема как бы такая достаточно интересная и, как ни странно, очень модная в последнее время, да. Хотя она модна уже там много-много лет, но ну, то есть, почему-то вот в последнее время я несколько видел такой всплеск интереса. Ну, это, во-первых, связано с тем, что такие вещи используются во всяких, то, что называется, квантовые фонды для эти все новые фонды, которые торгуют всякими акциями по миру, там много у них программистов пишут для них различные, соответственно, коды, которые позволяют там короткое время выигрывать. Вот. Собственно, ну вот эта модель с переключениями, действительно, даже мы там пытались как-то ее использовать для определения, собственно, вот этих режимов на рынке. Но вот я просто даже сейчас, ну, это только начало исследований, я просто, может быть, какие-то такие идеи выскажу, какие я видел, и то, что можно сделать. Во-первых, можно переключать не просто, так сказать, между похожими моделями, а можно, так сказать, переключать между совсем не похожими. Да? То есть, вот, например, там, во время кризиса там совершенно, может быть, другая модель, и, так сказать, вот этот инструментарий, он позволяет переключаться между даже разного типа моделями, и, соответственно, вот я так понимаю, что это было бы таким тоже, может быть, направлением, да, посмотреть. Ну и вообще есть такое даже отдельное направление, которое сравнивает различные типы моделей, вот, и, собственно, выбирает наиболее подходящие. Вот как раз опять к истории с этими квантовыми фондами, то есть есть целое тоже направление, которое вот, ну, различные вот эти hidden марков, и режим switching и другие типы моделей, все они сравниваются по своей там предсказательной силе и так далее, и, собственно, выбирается наилучший. Вот у меня сейчас студентка, она пишет уже работу по похожей тематике, ну, в магистратуре. Вот, но она такая, там совсем эконометрики очень много, вот такая математическая работа. Вот как раз она сравнивает различные типы моделей на их предсказательную силу. Вот, не на российском рынке, на американском. На российском, конечно, тут есть свои особенности, и, ну, которые надо учитывать на самом деле. Вот. Но в любом случае, в целом, что здесь можно сказать, что, в принципе, я еще раз хочу сказать, что тема интересная, здесь очень много вокруг близких таких направлений для исследований. И вот единственное, что нужно, как бы, когда писать статью, вот, наверное, задуматься о конкретных применениях. То есть вот либо это касается, ну, предсказания, там, мы знаем, электровыигрывателей не существует, да, поэтому здесь нужны конкретные применения. Либо это касается, значит, какого-то оценки все-таки стоимости капитала, может быть, даже с использованием вот этой модели попытаться там ожидаемую доходность как-то там получить, да? Либо это касается там вот действительно каких-то торгов и попытки, ну вот, там переключать между режимами, там какие-то ловить, ну, то, что связано, вся эта литература с high frequency trading, может быть, вот это вот направление. То есть здесь нужно понимать, ну, не просто так абстрактно там модель существует и что-то пытается там предсказать на рынке. Здесь нужно какие-то конкретные, конкретные по применению пласты литературы выбрать. То есть либо это, допустим, asset pricing, либо это high frequency trading, ну вот что такое, либо вот там, какое-то управление тоже активами, не знаю. Ну, то есть вот нужно понять, что где используется, и, соответственно, скорректировать вот, даже research question в работе. Вот в этом плане, мне кажется, более нужно тоже подумать. Вот, ну, в целом, да, то есть хороший вариант, интересный, и надо двигаться дальше.
Можно я несколько добавлю слов? Значит, мне, Юрий Яковлевич, а это может быть много моделей одновременно с переключением, наверное, тоже, да?
Да, то есть переключаться
Вот.
можно.
И здесь может быть деревья решений, посмотреть какие-то модели, связанные с искусственным интеллектом, я не знаю. Деревья решений, может быть, нейронные сети, вот такие вот вещи, да? И, ну, немножко в другой плоскости, но, может быть, вот была в бизнес-информатике статья Бурюхина, может быть, стоит посмотреть, Анастасия. И у меня вопрос к вам. Вот, Анатолию Пересецкий, 2 ссылки были. Это в самом деле старые работы на эту тему, да?
Ну, да, это такие основные работы, которые говорят о том, что влияние фундаментальных факторов изменяется во времени. Вот они как раз строили скользящую регрессию. Вот предыдущей статьи у нас, точнее, предыдущая наша работа была как раз посвящена скользящей регрессии, структурным сдвигам. Вот, и сейчас мы как раз решили, зная о том, что факторы меняются, немножко попробовать режимы функционирования фондового рынка выявить с помощью такой модели.
Ну, у вас связи с РЭШ есть, вот, может быть, тоже посмотреть в ту сторону. Я думаю, что Анатолий двигался, и Горяев, и еще кто-то вот смотреть. Спасибо, удачи.
Спасибо вам большое.
And last but not the least, we still have one more presentation by Nikita Redkin. Никита, how are you?
Здравствуйте, слышно меня?
Да.
Хорошо. Так, минуту. Презентацию видно?
Угу.
Вас не видно, одни очки.
Сейчас немножко опущу.
Вот, совсем другое дело, теперь лицо видно.
Good evening, my name is Nikita Redkin. I'm third-year graduate student at Tübingen State University. The topic of my research paper is the investigation of the impact of naive diversification on a behavioral investment portfolio in the Russian stock market. The scientific advisor of this work is Professor Boldarova Natalia Bronislavovna. My research is aimed to the analysis of behavioral aspects of portfolio construction. The main idea of the paper is a combination of cumulative prospect theory, utility function, and mean variance optimization. I analyzed the effect of naive and known assets biases based on both modern portfolio theory and modified behavioral portfolio theory. Firstly, I will give the definitions of both effects observed in paper. Naive diversification problem is the behavioral bias of investments by separation of portfolio at same shares. It's a behavioral finance effect which is specific for financial market. Thus, it isn't connected directly with prospect theory, but it has some common features of irrational utility evaluation. The other effect is also a behavioral finance bias. It's called known assets preference because it unites two similar effects of psychological prioritizing of known events or objects over unknown ones. In this paper, I suggest to combine the effect of given preference to the option recommended by authoritative person, for example, for investor it can be close people, and effect of own company preference, which means the preference of a company stock where the investor employed because he supposes it has both high reliability and good perspectives. I suggested to combine two last effects because of similar mechanism and reasons. The literature on the naive and preferred diversification has developed on a number of issues developed in literature. Presentation of naive diversification mechanism at pension funds was developed by Bernard Thaler and Reed and Simonson. Later on, specific naive diversification consequences for investment portfolio were discovered by Gertzman, Mitten, and others. A naive diversification model itself were formalized as a preference framework by Enrico de Giorgi. Although earlier attempts were made to formalize the theory of naive diversification as a mathematical model, the effect wasn't fully used in behavioral portfolio theory and in behavioral portfolio model with mental accounts. Next slide shows the place of naive diversification, including known as preference, at behavioral science and portfolio theory areas of research. From one side, the behavioral finance topic with some attitude to cumulative, behavioral finance topic with some attitude to cumulative prospect theory. From other side, it's a question of rebalancing portfolio with behavioral attitude. So it's a subject of behavioral portfolio theory and main variant theory. In this paper, I propose the formalization of this phenomenon in the form of mathematical model within the framework of general model of behavioral investment portfolio. The conducted study is based on testing the application of naive diversification model on the data of Russian stock and debt markets. The methodology of the described model has 3 steps. The main idea of model is the combination of mean variant theory and with mental accounts model, where the probability and return are evaluated with behavioral coefficients. The final innovation of the model is the integration of known assets preference and naive diversification. By doing this, I suppose to take into account both behavioral approach and the mathematical principle of MVT choice. So we unite behavioral coefficients, including cumulative prospect theory and naive diversification behavioral coefficients, and integrate these models into a whole model of MVT choice, which were developed earlier. MVT with the mental accounts choice. Thus, the first step of the model is calculation of subjective return, where it's assumed to reevaluate return definition itself as a utility category according to cumulative prospect theory. For this reason, it's used. I used risk and loss coefficients. The formula is on the slide. The second stage begins with standard VT optimization by formulation with risk aversion coefficient. The result of such optimization is probability of getting a particular return level. The last stage is correction of optimization results. In my model, it's suggested to evaluate probability as it was made in the first step according to cumulative prospect theory. After this stage, results of MVT-MA model is corrected by simple process of naive diversification revaluation. The result is equal shares in portfolio, but if there is a coefficient of known assets preference, it's assumed to naively diversify this category of assets firstly. It can be seen as unreasonable action in terms of standard theory, but completely correlates with formulation of existing behavioral diversification effect. The last step is mental account probability optimization, as it is made in MVT-MA model. The result is number of portfolios with different levels of risk attitude and probability of achievement return levels. After formulation of model mechanism, I used the experiment data to test the effectiveness of model. As data, I used current prices at the end of the month for 1,600 assets traded on Moscow Stock Exchange. As a reference point for behavioral economic theory, I used data of central bank concerning the key rate values. Calculation were made based on 800 combinations of used retrospective and forecast future periods for 12 levels of naive diversification. All data in the research were divided in two periods. The first period was the analyzed data, current period, and the period of forecast data. Portfolio models were calculated on the basis of first group, and then the performance of the compiled portfolios in the next periods were evaluated in next period, in focus period. Using the above data, the profitability and risk parameters were calculated. There were a number of current data frequency and focus data frequency. The results of current period presented on the slide. The graph shows an improvement in the results within the period of the model, but it has rather worse results compared to indexes. The color is blue under the high level of indexes return. However, in focus period, it can be seen that the effect of using naive diversification mechanism is achieved at high values of behavioral coefficient. Accordingly, the advantage of the model is manifested with high values of naive diversification and a large period of data used over 3 to 5 years. On average, the risk level of the behavioral model doesn't exceed 8% of the focus data, which is acceptable results indicating the relative stability of predicted price level. Next slide shows a special characteristic for behavioral theory is expected probability of return. Observations indicate on the graph that there is an increase in the certainty and degree of expectation of certain level of profitability, but the value of profitability at the same time it decreases. In the focusing period of more than 3 to 5 years, the sharp coefficient of model with naive diversification begins to surpass the model without taking it into account. It showed on the slide. It should be noted that diversification is also has good results and at 50% level of naive coefficient, there is room for other assets besides preferred ones. However, with large values of coefficient, only the share of blue chips remains. The overall level of asset diversification is higher for behavioral portfolio. Summing up, it should be noted that the behavioral model modified in accordance with cumulative prospect theory, taking into account naive diversification coefficients, has the potential for application in the investment process and solves shortcomings of the classical model and the behavioral portfolio model. The model, however, the model has several advantages which are showed on the slide. It's sufficient level of diversification. It's also that model increases the expected probability of profitability. However, model has higher level of risk than standard models, but the effectiveness of the model is higher in the long term, and it's higher than the efficiency of the model with procrastination as a behavioral effect. However, one should take into account that a number of circumstances allow applying the behavioral model in real market. The model should be used in case of clear preferences for naive diversification, care should be taken in choosing preferred assets, because in this paper I took blue chips and they gave good results to the whole model. The model is effective only at high concentrations of stock preference index. The naive diversification index alone isn't effective. It's necessary to verify the risk level of the model and the behavioral characteristic of particular investor. And the last point is the calculation of the model should be carried out by means of program analysis and carried out by professional, because calculation of whole model can take hours, and it's necessary to use special software for this. Thank you for attention. I try to explain the basic points of my research. I will be glad to listen to your question.
Okay. Do we have questions? Maybe you will start your comments and then some questions maybe.
Actually, yeah, this paper, yeah, that's the last but not least,
Yeah.
right?
Difficult one, yeah, that, of course.
Yeah. So, first of all, I have actually several questions myself, because I didn't understand some conclusions. First of all, did you mentioned that you considered some bonds as well, because you mentioned some
yes,
yields,
I use
right?
different types of instruments. I try to show the slide. Yes, and I used stocks, depository receipts, foreign fund stocks, investment shares, bonds, and mortgage certificates. Different types of instruments without derivative market.
So, but you put all this together in one model.
Yes, because this is different type of assets, and common invariant theory doesn't suggest that it should be only stocks or only bonds. I used only return of these assets, so the essence of the model wasn't changed, I suppose.
Yeah, but like asset allocation and stock picking are different topics. If you put everything together, it's looks very strange, I guess, because like bonds, they have also yield structure, and it's just not very good if you.
I didn't use only prices of the assets. I also used coupon and dividends income to calculate the common return of the assets here.
No, dividends, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay if you include dividends. I mean that the bonds, they have this term structure issue, and it's just not very good if you analyze it, try to price them in the same model with the stocks, because they sort of different in nature, and you should divide the problem of, as I told you, the asset allocation problem and the portfolio and stock portfolio choice, or like pricing or prediction. So that is definitely strange, and because if you look at the literature, you always divide those two problems. So I would advise you to treat bonds separately, and probably just concentrate on. You might use this similar approach to price different types of instruments, but what I don't know, predict prices, but the problem is that you cannot treat bonds and stocks in the same model. And one more thing is that these coefficients that you use, how did you get them? Those the lambda.
Yes, I took them from original papers, but it's a discussion question. However, in literature of last years, for example, 2018 and 2019, 2010, the authors of previous behavioral portfolio theories use the same values of these coefficients. So I suppose in this literature, it's possible to use original coefficients which were developed by Tversky Kahneman by experimental way.
So you apply, but they use that for what? For American market, and you apply it for Russia?
They didn't use only for American market. They used as an explanation of human behavior of utility function of private person, not only investor. So
but do you think that American investors' behavior is similar to Russian investors' behavior? Because it's common knowledge that say Russian investors, they're much closer to investors from Europe and their behavior. For example, in the United States, in terms of asset allocation, investors hold more than 60% in stocks, and in Russia and Europe, investors usually hold just a few percents in stocks of their portfolios. So the behavior of investors in different countries are different, and the attitude toward risk and loss aversion coefficient could be very different in different countries. And since it obviously affects your results significantly, you should be careful, try to probably estimate yourself those coefficients. Besides that, did you address the issue of liquidity? Because you're looking at, I'm especially when you're looking at bonds, the liquidity of bonds is very low. So I would say that
I didn't address this issue. Probably it was to see the liquidity. I just used the return of the assets and the period of time of this return.
Yeah, so the liquidity is very important issue, and in the Russian market, yeah, like if you pick the most liquid stocks, they're sort of okay, probably for your model, but still there is a spread, and you should take it into account. And the liquidity on the bond market is sort of low, and seriously affects your returns. So it should be definitely taken into account. I would like separate the research questions. Try first to analyze stocks because it's more straightforward, and to study bonds and to price them, to predict the portfolio returns. It's a different story with term structure models, and I don't think that your model should be really developed further to apply it for bonds. So I would say just stay with the stocks so far.
Okay, thank you for suggestions.
Yeah, so far it's interesting, really, that you developed this Kahneman-Tversky theory and try to apply it to the Russian market. That's an interesting story. So why not? But just be careful with bonds, I would say. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay. We are still alive, you know, bravo, I would say. 2 hours later than we planned before. Ну, я думаю, что мы сегодня хорошо поработали. Много было комментариев практически по абсолютно всем работам. Надеюсь, что все, кто выступал, получил определенные комментарии, считают их полезными. На сегодня мы расстаемся с вами, но мы интенсивно приглашаем тех, кто сегодня выступал, присоединиться к завтрашним дискуссиям, чтобы послушать и других ребят. Потому что в каждой работе, даже если она не совсем, прям, мягко говоря, близка по теме, все равно есть какие-то нюансы.
Ну, кого-то 20 числа тоже приглашаем. Конечно,
мы приглашаем на все эти дни. Вы пока, может быть, сумеете посмотреть наш вот этот журнал Journal of Corporate Finance Research, найти его на сайте университета в разделе «Наука», в «Науке» там публикации, журналы, издания Высшей школы экономики. Может быть, вы сочтете возможным, доведя ваши работы уже до определенного уровня статьи, посмотреть на требования нашего журнала, направить нам. Мы посмотрим на статью, поскольку, ну, для того, чтобы двигаться к вашим диссертациям и защитам, вам по-любому нужно иметь достаточное количество публикаций. Наш журнал относится к категории ваковских уже много-много лет, но в нашем университете совершенно специфические требования к списку журналов. Но я думаю, что... Ну и в нашем университете он тоже засчитывается для того, чтобы выходить на защиту. Ну, мы встретимся завтра в 10 утра, да, не проспите на радостях после сегодняшних выступлений.
А в 10 утра что будет?
А в 10 утра у нас Venture Capital and Startups.
Окей.
Сессия у нас с утра. И там полно потом. Дальше идет по Emerging Market Studies. Довольно много работ.
Первого, наверное, не будет, первого перерыва. Между сессиями перерыва там не будет.
Ну, вроде бы не будет, да, но...
Сразу.
Да.
Окей.
Так что, коллеги, всем всего доброго, до завтра. Огромное спасибо Юрию Яковлевичу. Я прям, ей-богу, не ожидала такой выносливости, что вы прям все работы.
А я в нем был уверен.
Да? Я очень признательна за то, что вы нашли в себе время, силы, вот, как-то и посмотреть, и столько ценных дать абсолютно всем. Не только тем, чьи работы мы вас просили посмотреть, но уже всем дали какие-то интересные рекомендации.
Абсолютно.
Так что остаемся на связи, да, завтра кто выступает, тот, естественно, обязательно присутствует. Всех остальных аспирантов мы тоже там завтра ждем. Всем всего доброго. Большое спасибо Кириллу, он тоже, надеюсь, еще с нами, потому что он от нас зависит теперь, он не может выйти из системы, пока мы не закончим.
Да, пока.
Всем до свидания.
Всего доброго.
Выхожу. Катапультируюсь.
Ирина Васильевна, можно вопрос быстрый? У нас завтра участник, который в 10 утра должен был быть, он не будет участвовать. То есть у нас первый...
Совсем не участвует, это Мириам.
Нет, она участвует. Вот в 10 утра там была другая девушка, вот она не участвует. А Мариам просто она в 10:20 начинает. Вот по плану.
Нет, у меня в 10 часов просто сессион, а в 10:20 Мириам, а с 10 до 10:20 как-то непонятно что.
Ну вот с 10 до 10:20 должен был быть другой участник.
Давайте Мариам с 10:20, с 10 прямо.
А мы успеем ей передать. Дело в том, что это же связываться надо, это Питер.
Ну, Кирилл напишет.
А если она не прочтет, не успеет прочитать?
Телефон есть, Кирилл?
Нет, нет телефона.
Откуда она?
Из питерской вышки.
Ну, питерскую вышку найти можно, телефон, позвонить руководителю.
Тогда надо и Родионову тоже, потому что если Родионову послали, что в 10:20, а он рецензент, то получается не здорово. Ну, надо попробовать. Если нет, ну тогда начнем позже, ничего страшного. Будем ждать ее. Пока.
Ага.
Ну, а что теперь остается?
Что ночует?
Да, хорошо. Спасибо, Кирилл. Большое спасибо. А на завтра ссылка та же самая или будет другая?
Да, та же самая.
Та же самая. Угу. Все, спасибо. Всего доброго.
Спасибо.
До свидания.